Thank you for joining us. This morning's Wheel and Anchor webinar is Boating the Canal du Midi. I will start off with our usual introduction. So for those of you who've tuned in on many of our webinars, you'll already know the spiel, but I always like to talk for a brief moment about what Wheel and Anchor is all about and why we are all here. Our mission, our goal, my passion is to bring travelers together. I've been bringing Canadians on trips for the better part of 30 years. And when we started Wheel and Anchor as a travel community some years back, the reason for it is that my experience with traveling with people from all walks of life from all over the country is that when you put a bunch of like-minded people together, particularly Canadians, and you approach it from the perspective of a bunch of friends traveling together, we have a lot of fun. And more importantly, I think that we like to experience the world, and our deference to culture and tradition and all the rest of it is something that we all tend to share, and it's something that it always makes me feel very proud and very happy. And so that's what we're about at Wheel and Anchor. And my personal mission for every single one of our members is to be well-traveled and well-connected. And when we say well-traveled, when you take one of those old-fashioned bus tours across Europe, and today is Tuesday, it must be Rome, and Thursday it must be Paris, is not really what we mean. We like to spend a little bit more time, slow things down, immerse ourselves, just sit in a cafe and have a glass of wine. That for us is the definition of well-traveled. And along the way, you meet such wonderful people, the other members that you travel with, as well as, of course, the locals from the countries that we visit. And it's those relationships and those memories that really define what a Wheel and Anchor experience is all about. Joining me today, as usual, so my name is Gordon. If I haven't met you before, I'm the founder of Wheel and Anchor, and I'm joined by Joel Curry, who's in the background, who's our co-founder and provides technical support, as well as Paula Zarnick. And I know a lot of you have spoken to Paula. She handles our all of our bookings and reservations and makes sure that each and every one of you who decide to come on one of our trips is well looked after. Our plan today is to take you, our members who are curious about this interesting place called Canal du Midi in the southwestern part of France, and I'm going to be your guide as we explore this region of France and this very unique experience it's a little bit different than if we often think about houseboating. We think about Shuswap Lake in British Columbia or the Trent Severn in Ontario, but this is a little bit different, and I'll get into the reasons for that in just a minute. I mentioned at the outset that this program is actually one segment of our so-called France Kaleidoscope program. And I just realized a huge storm is coming in, so bear with me for a second because it's a... Sorry about that. A huge storm just blew right into my front door, so I had to close the window so it didn't blow my laptop off. So this program is one segment of our so-called France Kaleidoscope program. So if you look at the map of France here, and this is the first one that we're releasing, although it is part 3. The first week we're going to do in the first week of October of next year is visit Normandy and the landing beaches, the D-Day landing beaches, and we're going to stay in a wonderful little boutique hotel near the town of Bayeux. And then in the second week of our program, we're going to be going down to visit the Burgundy region with the second largest city in France, Lyon, which is, of course, the gastronomic capital of France. And we'll be touring through the Rhone Valley as well as into the Haute-Savoie, which is the Alpine region in the eastern part of France. The third part, of course, Canal du Midi. That's what we're going to be talking about tonight. And the last part of that program we'll be spending in Provence, which of course is in the southeastern part of France, and as well as the Côte d'Azur. So staying in the city of Nice and visiting the beautiful French coastline. So that's what that program is all about. But today it's all about the Canal du Midi. So let me go into a little bit more detail about how this program is going to work. First of all, we'll take a look at the map. So as I mentioned, this is part 3 of a 4-part program, but of course you can participate in any one or any multiple of those weeks. For those who are flying in from Canada, so that you want to do just this week or you want to do the Canal du Midi and Provence. We'll start in Toulouse, so you can fly via Paris, via Frankfurt, by a number of gateways to the city of Toulouse. And from there, we'll spend one night and then take a short train ride down to the medieval city of Carcassonne, which is where our Canal du Midi experience will commence. For those who are going to participate in the other segments of the France Kaleidoscope, we'll be taking the TGV, that's the Train à Grande Vitesse, that's the high-speed train that goes, has a huge network in France, and we'll be going from Lyon directly to Carcassonne and meeting our other group members who join us there. And it's there that we'll embark on our houseboat, and over the course of 7 nights, make these wonderful stops along the lower part of the Canal du Midi, that's between Carcassonne and the Mediterranean, ending at Agde. And from there, those who are continuing on will bring to the airport in Montpellier, and otherwise we'll continue by coach to Aix-en-Provence, which is the area where we're going to be spending the Provence part of our trip. So now, boating the Canal du Midi. So starting again with the detailed itinerary, we begin, as I mentioned, in Toulouse if you're flying in from Canada, and there's some pretty good connections from it through a number of European gateways into Toulouse. And Toulouse is famous for a couple of different things. Well, first of all, it's the European aeronautic capital. Many of you will know that the headquarters of Airbus and the main assembly facility for Airbus is in Toulouse. So when you land at the airport, you look over and you can see all of these big Airbus 380s and all the aircraft that are parked there waiting to be painted and waiting to fly off. So that's the first impression that you get of Toulouse, but it's actually known as the Pink City because all the buildings are, almost all the buildings are made out of pink granite. And I recall having had a wonderful experience in a city that is otherwise not usually on the tourist trail for most people coming from North America. So as I say, for those joining from Canada, we'll start in Toulouse. We'll then board a train the next morning after having a bit of an orientation tour and a welcome dinner, and we'll head down to Carcassonne. And as it's about an hour train ride, about 50 minutes, I think, from Toulouse down to Carcassonne. And as I said, for those joining from Lyon, we'll take the TGV in the mid-morning and arrive into Carcassonne in the early afternoon, and we'll all get together and meet at the houseboat port or terminal and embark on our houseboat. So first, a word about Carcassonne before I get into the houseboats. Carcassonne is perhaps the most important medieval city in Europe. It's needless to say a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it has origins dating back some 2,000 years, so back to the time of Christ. There's 3 kilometers of walls that circle this fortress that, as you can sort of see from the picture, it sits up on this hilltop, and all of the countryside around Carcassonne is otherwise pretty flat. And you have this very striking fortified city that sits up there. So it is certainly a place that a lot of people go a long way out of their way to visit. This is our starting point. We will have a chance the afternoon that we arrive to visit it. Perhaps we'll have dinner up in the fort, and we can probably make another trip first thing in the morning as well before we start to venture down the canal. So let's talk for a second about the houseboat and what this experience is all about. So we have a couple of different houseboat models that we have pre-reserved for this particular experience. Most of them are between 42 and 49 feet in length, and they look a little bit like the one you see in the picture here. And here's a floor plan of the houseboat, and they do have somewhat different layouts, but essentially you have 4 cabins plus a crew cabin. Each of the cabins has a private washroom, like a sink and a toilet and a shower. And then you've got a nice lounge area. All of it is enclosed and air conditioned, although in October we typically don't need air conditioning, but you never know. And then on top you have ample deck space with deck chairs where you can just sort of hang out and relax and watch the countryside go by. There's also a full kitchen on board with a fridge, which we are going to fully stock with local wine and beer and other soft drinks and so on, and as well as snacks. So we'll have everything we need for the trip, but we'll be doing most of our meals on in restaurants along the way. And that's part of the appeal for this trip, because people have asked me before, what about the barge trips on the Canal du Midi? It's another popular way to visit it. And the thing with the barges, and they're very nice, very luxurious. A lot of them are quite small, so the cabins are even tinier than the ones you'll find on a houseboat. And these ones are certainly not huge. I mean, we're not talking hotel rooms. Many of you have traveled on boats before, but there is ample room to sort of get in and out and move around. So they're, I think, a little bit more comfortable than your average barge. Secondly, on a houseboat trip like we're doing versus doing a barge trip, what I find appealing about being in this part of France is going out into the little villages that line the canal to eat breakfast at the local boulangerie, or to have dinner at a bistro, and you really feel like you're part of France. When you're taking a barge trip, for example, you tend to eat all the meals on board the ship, and although you wander around into the villages, you don't necessarily have the opportunity to have that adventure of eating out. So that's some of the reasons why we opted for a houseboat trip, and honestly, quite frankly, it's a better value for money. Joel, are we having trouble with the slides? Okay, yeah, great. So we will, as I say, embark of our houseboat in Carcassonne, and the next morning we'll perhaps have time to zip one more time up to the fortified city for anybody that wishes to, but otherwise we are going to meander down the river to our first stop, which is the town of Trèbes. So what'll happen on an average day on our houseboat? Well, we'll get up in the morning fairly leisurely. We'll be moored usually by a set of locks, or perhaps near a village. We kind of get to choose. We have an itinerary, and you'll see how I'm going to explain the places that we stop. But the beauty of this kind of a trip is that we can kind of play it by ear. So if we decide that we really enjoy a place and we arrive already at 2 in the afternoon, we might just stay there for the night, because we're not, we have certain things that we're committed to, but otherwise we can kind of go at our own pace. And again, that's a little bit the beauty of this trip. We go through 33 locks on the whole trip from Carcassonne all the way down to Agde on the Mediterranean. On this day, for example, we'll pass over a couple of very interesting features on the canal, like the Frequel and Orbe aqueducts. This is where the canal actually, you travel in a boat over top of the river. So it's kind of a neat experience if you haven't done that kind of thing before. We'll stop in Trèbes, which is a larger town. We'll have lunch, we'll have a tour of the town. And what you'll find here is that you are in the real part of France. There's, other than other people who might be cruising up the canal, you won't find many other tourists. You may even find that some people don't even speak English here. I mean, of course, we're along the way to assist you and help you out. But that's the beauty of really going into the heartland of France. The next day, again, so let me continue what the usual program for the day. So we'll get up in the morning. We'll walk into the local village, where every village in France, of course, has a boulangerie. They like for us, we have Tim Hortons, and they have French bakeries, and we'll have some breakfast there or a cup of coffee. Anybody that wants to sleep in, will bring something back to the boat, and then we'll start our cruising. And we cruise at a pretty slow pace. A lot of the way, like you can see in this picture, there's paths that go alongside the canal. For those that wish, we can organize at a nominal surcharge a bike, so you can bike alongside the boat. It makes for a very, very interesting and fun kind of a journey. So pardon the noise in the background. So the next day we're heading down towards Puicheric, which is another little village, and these names won't mean a lot to you, but here we're going to experience a French cooking class. And what makes this particular stop interesting is that we'll learn a little bit about the art of the apéritif. And of course, a lot of us throw the term around apéritif. It's the beverage that we drink before our meal. In France, it's typically pastis, which is that anise flavored liquor. And they're going to explain to us a little bit about the significance of the apéritif as we learn about the art of French cooking. The other thing that I really find interesting about this town is that This is where three different waterways actually intersect. So you have the Canal du Midi, and I didn't say it at the onset, but the Canal du Midi was built way back about 150 years ago, and it was designed to connect the Atlantic Ocean to the Mediterranean, because otherwise, in order to bring commodities like bulk goods from the inside of France, way back at that time, I mean, you either did it sort of by horse-drawn carriage, or they had barges that went down and delivered all of these raw materials either out to the ports on the Mediterranean downstream, or upstream on the ports on the Atlantic Ocean. So that was the idea behind building this Canal du Midi. Excuse me for one more second. I just have to make some storm. Sorry about that. Didn't want the rain coming in the front door. That came out of nowhere. So that is Puy-Chéric, and we'll continue down the canal the next day and heading to yet another medieval village. And again, this is what makes this part of France very interesting, because the history is very, very long. It's one of the oldest parts of France. And so Carcassonne being the pinnacle of all these towns, but there's several other villages along the way. And you can imagine that, like you see in the countryside here, you have a range of mountains in the background, and this valley where the Aude River flows through, and the Canal du Midi, which of course, intersects the river and various other bodies of water along the way. So it's super idyllic countryside. On our way to Argent-Minervois, there's a whole stretch of the canal that has a number of locks, bridges, aqueducts, and then we get to Minervois itself, which is a 14th century town, and has a very special church that was dedicated to a saint called Vincent. Here in this town, for example, we'll have dinner at leisure, because there's a few different bistros and restaurants to choose from. So we want to sort of mix it up by dining together as a group, or have the ability again to go off on our own and experience a little bit ourselves. And again, that's part of what makes the whole thing a lot more fun. We continue down, and again, we're heading sort of southeast here as we make our way towards the Mediterranean. We'll pass a bunch more interesting towns and villages. Sometimes we'll stop and we'll do an impromptu wine tasting. We can kind of do whatever it is that we like. So the way that the trip is laid out is that we're sailing for 3-4 hours a day. So as a result, we can sort of, if we're in a nice town, we can hang around and leave late morning, or we might decide to get up and go early and get to the next place by lunchtime. We'll go at a pace that sort of suits everybody on the trip, and that's being what makes it kind of fun. On our way to Capestagne, we'll visit another aqueduct, 17th century aqueduct, which is the oldest one in the world. So interspersed with the countryside, you see some amazing, villages and historic structures, like, for example, these aqueducts. And we'll also stop in a little town called Le Sommeil, which has a huge antique bookstore and a hat museum and a bunch of stuff that you just, a little bit different. We'll probably stay overnight at Capestagne, which is yet another medieval town. But as I was saying before, sometimes we may just opt to stop at a quieter spot next to a lock along the way. It'll all depend on the restaurants that we decide to dine in. Maybe we'll do a barbecue on board one night. We'll sort of mix it up so that the experience is one that you can really have a sense of what it's like in the rural part of France. So we then make our way to Béziers. So this is a larger town. You can see the beautiful aqueduct there. Here they have another neat feature along the canal, and there's a whole bunch of these things, but in this case they have a tunnel. So the canal actually goes through a small mountain. It's not very long, it's only about 160 meters, but it's the oldest canal tunnel in the world. So, as you can imagine, a neat feeling with your houseboat going through a tunnel, something you don't generally do. I don't think we have any houseboat tunnels in Canada, as far as I know. And then the final day of our trip, we will head down to Agde, which will be our disembarkation point, the end of our houseboat trip. And it's, as you approach the Mediterranean, you see some very interesting landscape because you start to see the étangs. And the étangs are the French lagoons that separate the south coast and the Aude River from the Mediterranean. And they look like lakes. They're of course quite brackish, and what they're famous for is that's where a lot of the French oysters come from, is from these massive lagoons. And we'll pass some as we are heading down into Agde. Here we'll have our final overnight, and we'll go out for a lovely, lovely farewell dinner in the middle of this town, and the next day we'll be wrapping it up, and that will conclude this leg of our trip. So from here, we will, depending on, for those who are planning to join us for the fourth leg of our France Kaleidoscope tour, we will go to Provence by coach, and for the others that are finishing here, so you may have done segment 1 and 2 and then finished here, or just Burgundy and the Canal du Midi, we will bring you to Montpellier Airport. And from there, again, just like Toulouse, you get connections back to Canada. So, and that will pretty much wrap up our program. Just to give you some logistical information, and all of it is available in our brochure, which you will receive together with a copy of the replay of this webinar. Tomorrow, I believe that should come out. But this program, I think, is pretty reasonably priced at $38.50 based on double occupancy. And for single occupancy, it's a relatively modest single supplement, bringing it into about $4,500, all Canadian, of course. And so one thing I didn't mention at the outset about our houseboats is they have 4 cabins typically each. So on a 4-cabin houseboat, we are going to average around 6 people. It could be 5, it could be 7. But we're not going to put 8 people on a houseboat, so there's a little bit of extra elbow room on there. We're going to balance it out at around 5 people per houseboat. That means that we could have 2 couples in a single, or a couple and 3 singles, and that's generally how we are going to be traveling. So, and of course, we have more than 1 houseboat, so we anticipate doing a group of either 2 or 3 houseboats. And so, of course, the more the merrier. We'll have a lot of fun that way, but it also means that we can do a little bit our own thing. We don't always have to travel exactly together, because each boat will have its own captain. So, so now, see, let me just cover the inclusions and exclusions before we get to the questions. But if you do have questions, just hang on to them for 1/2 a second. This program, like most of ours, includes all of the transportation. So in this case, if you're arriving from Lyon, all of the trains back and forth, or if you're coming in from Toulouse, as well as any side trips that we make along the way. So for example, we've arranged a cooking class, which is about a 20-30 minute drive from the canal, and a few other trips. So all of the transportation is there. Of course, everything related to the houseboat, and meals. We have breakfast every day, typically a continental type breakfast where we'll go to one of those French boulangeries. And then we have lunches or dinners interspersed through the trip. So there's really quite a lot built into the trip. Any of the guided sightseeing that we do, including some of the wine tastings, all part of the program. So in terms of exclusions, just for your awareness, as usual, the airfare is separate, but we can certainly arrange that for you. Travel insurance, which is pretty much a necessity. And the only other thing that you need to look for is if you'd like to rent a bike. And if you are even a little bit active, it's great to have a couple of bikes along. So it's fun to be able to race the houseboat as we're cruising down the canal. Talking about airfare, just to give you a sense of that, we are still, routes are still being added as the world opens up again after the pandemic. When I last looked in October, and we're talking, of course, October of 2022, so we won't know for sure until about 10, 11 months prior, so about the end of this year. But generally speaking, flying into Toulouse and out of Montpellier, or pretty much any airport in France, should range from about $900 to $1,200, depending which city in Canada that you are flying from. So before I get to the questions and answers, of course, here's our contact information. If you have any questions at all about this trip, or if you'd like to join us, you can please give us a call, or Paula will be on the other end of that line, or drop us an email. I'm also always happy to answer any questions that you might have, because I've, needless to say, been in this region before. I've been on one of these houseboats, so I have a pretty good knowledge about what it is that we can expect. So please, if you have any questions, now is the Q&A time, and I see that a few questions have come in already. And let me just make sure that my Q&A. So first of all, from Ardell, if you bike, is there an opportunity to get back on the boat during the day? Listen, you can bike for as long or as short as you wish. So you can bike for 20 minutes because it's not like we're going to be very far apart from one another. And there are so many locks along the way that even if you were to race ahead on your bike, or the other way around, if the boat was to get ahead of you, at some point they're going to hit a lock. And you're gonna catch up. So there is as much or as little biking as you pretty much want. There are a few segments where it's a bit hilly or there's no road directly beside, but for the most part, you can certainly bike along. Charles asked, are singles expected to share a cabin? No, definitely not. So our single supplement is single supplement. You get your own cabin. Of course, you can share a cabin if you want, and we have our companions for the road program for those who are looking to find somebody to experience the trip with, in which case we would have a twin cabin for you, but otherwise our single program means you get your own cabin. Mike asked, can we drive? Well, there's not really any opportunity to drive because we're in oh, can you drive the boat? Now I understand, Mike. Absolutely. So the boat will be driven by either a captain, depending on how many boats we have in our little entourage, will be one of our local French captains, or the host, or it could be one of you. So the nice thing about the Canal du Midi is that there is no special license required to drive a boat, which is usually the case in most parts of Europe. So by all means, you can drive the boat. So if that's what turns your crank, definitely. Tracy asked about the temperatures that we can expect in October. My experience in France in October is the weather can be all over the place. So, you know, it could be in the low 20s, so you could get quite a relatively warm weather, but it could also be in the sort of low to mid-teens. I would say generally in October, it doesn't, during the day, it doesn't drop much below 14 or 15 degrees, but at night, it could certainly hit something like 10, which is nice because it's great sleeping weather, but really, I think a perfect time to cruise through this countryside. Judy asked about electrical outlets in the cabin. If you need a converter, yes, it is European voltage, so it's 220 volts. So you don't need a converter so much as you need an adapter in Europe, because pretty much all electrical appliances, if they were made in the last 10 years, will take dual voltage. So they'll take anything from 110 up to 240. So as long as you have that little adapter, but that is necessary. And usually if I'm the host, I usually stick a couple extra in my pocket, but it's a good thing to go and pick up at the dollar store. Then Diane asked, are water levels in the river a problem for the boats? No. So they're not a problem here because this isn't a river, it's a canal. And the levels of the canal are balanced at various points along the way so that they always can ensure navigability. So there is no water issue like you have on the river cruises in some other parts of Europe. They keep it fluctuates slightly, but not such that we wouldn't be able to go. At least not that I'm aware of in the last 20 or 30 years. The canal levels are always pretty much the same. Dave asked, is there any movement on the boat? Will I get seasick? It's a canal, so no. There is, you know, the most movement you get is if another boat passes in the other direction, and you might get a very gentle rocking, but this river is flat, so you don't have to worry about seasickness. Dean asked, can you swim in the canal? Well, Dean, if you'd like to swim in the canal, you can. I don't know if I would recommend it, but the good thing is that the canal has a number of reservoirs and sort of feeder lakes along the way. So, and it is October, so it's not generally swimming weather, I have swum in one of the lakes that you find through the countryside. So for those who are anxious to go for a dip, we will be able to make that happen. Good. I think I have answered all the questions for now. Thank you so much for participating in our webinar today. Again, please do email us if you have any questions at all. Just wanted to let you know, next week at this time, Thursday on the 22nd of July, we have the re-release of our Live Away Cyprus program. I think there's a few people that are already booked on that program. We have modified it slightly. We're going to be staying in 2 different towns in Cyprus. That's in March of next year. So if you thought at all about joining us for Cyprus, we have a couple of rooms left. You can join us for that webinar, which is next week. Thank you so much for joining us, and it's been a delight, and I hope you find, at the very least, you enjoyed some of our lovely pictures of Languedoc-Roussillon in France, I look forward to hearing from you and catching up from you all very, very soon.